I've got a co-author on this presentation, Colin Skanes. He is a stress physiologist, one of the most renowned in the world, and we talked about this to put this presentation together. And another stress physiologist that I need to mention is the late Dr. J. Paul Thaxton. He passed away when I was at Mississippi State working with him, and his wife gave me this tie, so I wore it today in his honor. But not only is he a stress physiologist, but these chickens look pretty stressed on this tie, so I thought it was good to wear today. Okay. It's a pleasure to be here in the beautiful city. So I pose a question to start. So if we take a teenager from this beautiful city and we put him in the beautiful countryside, and we take a teenager from the beautiful countryside and we put him in the beautiful city, which one's going to have stress? So the point is, much of the stress that we think about can be our emotional stress, okay, and our perceived stress. In heat stress, it's very important to understand you've got to have a control. And it's been mentioned a number of times throughout the presentations today. For example, in the meta-analysis, some of the data was thrown out because it's very easy to do a hot temperature experiment, but if the hot temperature experiment doesn't have a valid control to estimate the degree of difference of which the stress caused, then you can't call it stress, period. And because stress is a treatment, you typically have to have those treatments replicated throughout one facility compared to another. So in reality, when you look at heat stress, there's not a lot of data out there that's been published, and I'm going to cover quite a bit of what I can. Conceptually, this is a classical representation of stress. We worry a little bit, everything goes up, we have an alarm, we get better, okay? The problem is, this is a classical way to express the stress. Dr. Skanes just finished the new physiology book. So how many of you studied Sturkey's physiology in college? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, raise your hands. This is scaring me here. You're supposed to all study this. Okay? All right. Anyway, it's a different book. The picture was different, so okay. So with Sturkey's physiology, it's just been rewritten. And Dr. Skanes and I had a discussion about stress, and this is how he interprets it now. Okay? The phase is completely different, and it should be this way. Because when we're stressed out, we're burning calories. We're excited. Things are going down. Okay? And then we recover. If things don't go down, we keep going down. For example, how do you get rid of stress? It's very simple. You die. Okay? Then it's gone. Okay? But you've got to recover. Okay? So you recover to the point of adequacy. Now, in this presentation, a number of different things will be mentioned with amino acids that I'll get into. Conversions, processing yields, excretion products. One thing that hasn't been mentioned that I think is very, very important, as Mingan talked about with the environment, is water conversion, for example. We don't think a lot about water conversion, but with stress, it's going to go up. So 3 areas that I will go into. The first being immunological, then physiological, and then most of the presentations with hot temperature. So first, with the immune system. I covered a few papers from the laboratory of Claising at UC Davis. This paper is a classic, and it talks about methionine and lysine needs with physiological stress. So in the first graph, you see methionine. So you have 2 different responses here. One is feed conversion. Okay, one is body weight gain. Pierre-Andre, can you see that mouse? Okay, both screens. I'll just use this. So for example, with the control, now I'm wondering if you can hear me in the back. Yeah, you can hear me good. You've got the control, the response is basically linear, and then it plateaus off. Okay, so the bird, based on the immunologic stress and the conversion or the repartitioning of nutrients, does not need the amount of methionine that it typically did. The same is true with lysine. And this stress is very real. This is a lipopolysaccharide, which is a starch cell wall of a bacteria, which we see more of in various programs that are ABF. So it's very real. We see the same response with lysine. This work goes back to the days where penicillin was used to create germ-free environments. This is when the antibiotics came on the market, because we figured out that if we sterilize the intestine and we allow the nutrient utilization to occur, basically in a subtherapeutic environment, we really could get tremendous growth in broilers. Well, the problem is we're moving away from that. These are acronyms at the top that we use in the United States: ABF, NAE, and RWA, which is raised without antibiotics. And I think we're going to have to reevaluate a number of different things with stress in terms of disease stress and immunologic stress with amino acid requirements, because we have a complete change in the response. Many countries, I think, treat birds differently. In the United States, to have these terms, which is ABF, NAE, or RWA, you never can give the bird an antibiotic, not even an ovo. So if the bird gets sick and you treat it, it doesn't get marketed in that class. So we have about 35% of our birds that have never received antibiotics in the United States now. So we're changing how we look at nutrition. Physiologic stress, just a couple of points to mention here. Corticosterone is the compound that is used to induce the physiologic stress for the most part. The point is you see a complete partitioning in organs. More whole body fat, less whole body protein. Exactly what you don't want when you're selling meat or when you're selling chicken. In terms of the fat, it's everywhere. It's the abdominal, it's the cervical, and also in the thigh. You see higher levels of petechial fat in the thigh. So some effects there. This is work that I'd like to just briefly talk about that Scott Burden, who finished his PhD with me, looked at physiological stress, and he did so by creating a model, because this goes back to the first slide where I talked about when you look at stress, create a model that you can replicate and that you can compare to an industry standard, for example. Well, this model that worked was the use of corticosterone as opposed to ACTH. We did a number of amino acid density trials with this stress. We didn't see any significant improvements with amino acid density, but I wanted to show you this model. Also, you see the heterophil to lymphocyte ratio, which was mentioned in the first presentation, is going up with the stress. So what he did then with these model induction of stress was evaluated amino acid digestibility. So Ravi did a great job at presenting the amino acid digestibility under hot temperature. I wanted to show this part, and basically it shows when the bird is chronically stressed with physiological stress where feed conversion is terrible, body weight is terrible. There was no significant difference in any of the amino acids for amino acid digestibility, and just wanted to show this part because this was part of a PhD program that I was very close to. One last point on physiological stress. This is delayed placement work, and what was found in this delayed placement work is that it didn't really cause stress. But when they looked at remediation, for example, with glutamine to try to overcome the stress, they found very significant things with glutamine. They found improved villi height and crypt depth in this particular example, and I'll talk about that in the last couple of slides on amino acids and hot temperatures. So moving into the hot temperature, Minkin did a nice job on the feed intake. He talked about removal of feed in these birds and gave me a jungle fowl update, which I always like to go back to the classical birds and think about. But there's a number of concepts here with poultry nutrition. Energy coming from fat, for example, more so than carbohydrates or protein. In the pressure points of amino acids, trying to meet those with non-traditional, for example, the less limiting feed grade amino acids versus oilseed meals, toward ingredients that improve the buffering. Dr. Ferry already mentioned this in terms of sodium bicarbonate, for example. The last one, towards increasing amino acid, I put specs, amino acid specs. I use the word specs because I don't use requirement, because there's really no such thing, and there's obviously no such thing with hot temperature. Amino acid specs per unit of energy. This has been around, Patnay, we talked about 20 years. This has been around for 40 years. Hurwitz, Thomas, from Israel and Maryland, respectively, published this work in the late 70s and the early 80s. And I think what I've done here is made a point at the end that some of these ratios are going to vary. And I don't know what those ratios are, but I'll give you some of the data and we'll talk about it. One more slide before I focus on specific amino acids. This is mortality in the United States. So I graphed all companies from 2006 This goes to 2016. What's this bump right here? Anybody? What's that increase in mortality right here? That's us adjusting to our ABF programs, okay? We're learning. We're learning a lot, okay? A lot of chickens are dying because of it, but we're learning how to grow them better. The point I'd like to make here is in hot temperatures, we've got 140 complexes in the U.S., and about 130 of them have hot temperatures in June and July. Typical complex is 1 million birds a week, so that's 130 million birds a week. If you figure 1% mortality in the United States, which is about $250,000 over a year for a complex, that's over $30 million just for 1% mortality in the United States. That doesn't consider what we've been talking about. Dr. Ferry mentioned some of this, your feed conversion, your calorie conversion. If you adjust your calorie conversion back to the weight of which you lost, we're not even talking about that. So it's major in terms of even in the United States, and most of what we have we call Class A houses, which are solid side walls, tunnel ventilation, cool cells. One more point before I go through some of the data. I forgot I had this slide here. I can't go into the heat stress without talking about heat shock proteins, because this is my major professor from NC State, Mukarrab Qureshi. And Dr. Qureshi published a number of experiments looking at heat shock proteins. So basically these cells are releasing heat shock proteins, and when they do, they become stressed. When they become stressed, they don't function. This is a macrophage cell line, and you can see in this macrophage cell line, when it is looking at tumoricidal activities, phagocytosis, or any macrophage effector function, it's significantly going down. It's going down as temperature goes up. The cells are basically stressed. So it's good to keep in mind with the heat stress and the effects on things like metabolism, you've also got the immunity that are going to be in question. So with specific amino acids, I'll mention intestinal flow, I'll mention CP, methionine, lysine, arginine, tryptophan, and glutamine are the ones that I've listed in this presentation that I'll go through briefly. Flow of amino acids in the intestinal tract. This is a nice paper. This is in Putra, which is not very far away in Malaysia, where they have done some nice work looking at mucin properties and amino acid patterns, endogenous. And what I'd like to do is take this, and I've expanded on it since Ferry called me out this morning to talk about threonine. I'll expand a little bit on it. But I wanted to cover this because with these key amino acids in mucin, the intestinal layer, you were almost about to go into intestinal epithelial a little bit longer, I think. We haven't touched on it enough, but there's a tremendous impact from the load from stress, hot temperature stress, immunologic stress. There's things happening in the intestine in which you have sloughing, and it's a very high demand on the amino acids that are in question. In addition, these amino acids are going to be used as part of the first pass. Okay, if they have a higher rate of turnover, the intestinal epithelial cells will have the first right of refusal for those amino acids. That means the body's not even going to get it because they're going to need it, even if they're sloughing in these conditions. If you look at what Dr. Ravandin presented from Wallace and Balnave, that slide that he showed, if you noted the amino acid digestibility differences from that study that was done in Sydney, they're the exact same amino acids that are most important for intestinal epithelial. Very interesting, and I hadn't put that correlation together, Ravi, until you presented that slide. Threonine, it's going to be the key. When you look at the threonine requirement, it is so high for maintenance. Look at lysine, for example. It's 0. You can't measure it. Threonine is off the chart. One of the reasons it's off the chart is it's so high in mucin as a relative percent of other amino acids. In addition, if you look at glycine and serine, 2 of the amino acid pathways through the deamination of threonine are going to be converted to glycine and serine, both threonine aldolase and threonine dehydrogenase. Okay, so you've got tremendous impact for one amino acid in the gut that's going to be affected. So a few studies. This is a classic study. This is by Waldrop. So basically what Dr. Waldrop did is he looked at amino acid formulation techniques in 4 studies in the University of Arkansas, and one of them he did in the summer. and it got really hot. And I said, why'd you do that? He said, well, I didn't mean to do it, but it got hot, and I published it anyway as hot temperature. And that's how a lot of it got published, but it's kind of unique because what happened is he had different formulation patterns. So on one, which is the treatment number, it's not numbered here, but it's the second treatment, which is low essential amino acid levels, which is basically using least cost formulation to balance for those amino acids rather than setting a protein minimum. Remember, this is in the 1970s he did this, so protein minimums were really big back then. He saw the best effect here in a lower protein. Okay, so making the case, and this paper has been cited everywhere. This is the paper that is out there to show you, let's feed less amino acids in hot temperatures. Excuse me. That's why, because of this paper. If we look at recent research in Guelph, I say recent, it's 2005, it's quite a bit newer than the Waldorf data. They used two different types of heat stress. So first here you have temperature, which is in the 20, then mid-temperature, and then you have a temperature over 31. And then you have protein levels that range in 18 up to 26. Very high protein level. I don't go through a lot of the diet. I just want to show you here. If you look at the 26% protein level, in each particular, for each particular temperature phase, it was significantly better. Okay? Interactions almost occurred, but it's 0.06 right here. They make the point that we got to do more research, and I would agree looking at this because this is a protein level that is much higher than something that we would look at, that we would test, that we would evaluate. But even in the hottest temperature, it showed an improvement, which goes against some of the conventional wisdom, but at the same time, it's very interesting to think about. Here's a publication that specifically looks at methionine. So I draw your attention back to Dr. Claising, where he showed a very low response to methionine with immunologic stress. They did 2 trials, and I'll show you the 4 to 21 day data. They presented the responses to methionine, digestible basis. I took it and correlated it back to lysine and did some calculations from what they presented. But I did that so you could see this is awfully low. So this is much lower than you would anticipate, which shows a response in hot temperature that maybe in a certain situation the bird might need less methionine. And I see I've got a typo right here. Let me show you real quick. Oh no, it's okay. It's total sulfur amino acids to lysine. I thought I left lysine here from a previous slide. So that's the ratio, and it's very low. Take a look at some other work that was done. This one, Pierre-Andre and some others in the audience will be very familiar with at the Catholic University in Leuven, looking at methionine source under heat stress. Clear responses here with regard to HMTBA having a better effect on the growth performance, not only in thermal neutral, which are the two right here at the top. Boy, it takes a long time for this mouse to wake up. So here it is right here, but when you go down in this heat stress effect, you see the HMTBA having a much significant. So the HMTBA, the response on growth performance was significant in both effects, and what I found was most interesting was the looking at different responses. So I pulled out the insulin growth factor 1, a hormone, very important for improving growth rate, and there's no significant difference under thermal neutral, which are the first two. I feel like it makes noise when I get closer. I don't know what to do. I want to touch it, but I want to get away. But if you look right here at the blue slide, with blue graph, you see the DL-methionine versus HMTBA, very significant improvement, okay, based on the IGF-1. You coming up to help me, PAG? It got quiet. So a few more. Hahn and Baker. Dr. Ferry, he spoiled it. He showed this whole thing and summarized it. You didn't spoil it. You just set me up. Thank you. So with Hahn and Baker, this is pretty classic work. Also, they have 4 experiments in this publication. But one of them was looking for responses under hot temperature. The first is methionine, the second is lysine. So, sorry, they're both with lysine. The first was male, the second was female. Is everybody confused? This is a male and female experiment only with lysine. So the responses in the male are pretty classic. Nice growth responses, but no significant difference based on the hot temperature for the requirements. However, when we look at the female, if you can see maybe I'll just use a conventional pointer. Those over there have to look this way. If you look at this line right here, okay, versus this linear plateau here, it's breaking here versus this one keeps going up. This is what Dr. Ferry mentioned. This is an experiment whereby we have a higher amino acid requirement in heat stress for amino acid. This is lysine, just for the female. I can tell you right now, I'm not doing heat stress studies, but I'm doing a lot of research at Arkansas with females, and I can't figure them out. Well, I shouldn't say it that way. I've never been able to figure out females. That really came out wrong. I wish this wasn't getting recorded. But with regard to the amino acid nutrition, much more whole body fat versus whole body protein. So things are dynamic with the females in terms of the responses. So still have a little bit to learn. So I can't talk on heat stress without arginine and lysine. This is work that I was involved both with John Brake and Derek Balnave on. And in this particular publication, they put 3 of the experiments together. So in the first one, you've got the thermal neutral compared to the heat stress with 2 arginine-lysine ratios. Body weight gain, if you see there was a response in the thermal neutral with arginine. There wasn't in terms of feed conversion, but what is noted here is a significant improvement in the feed conversion with higher levels of arginine in the heat stress environment. And also in another experiment, the same effect was repeated here. In the third experiment, which is much more comprehensive and it focuses on the finisher period, there's thermal neutral versus heat stress here, and there's more arginine-lysine ratios, so 9:4, 108, 125, 139. But if we go to the heat stress, you can see the effect here versus, say, 0.94. So all of these higher levels of arginine resulted in an improvement. Okay, what's the effect of arginine? It's been studied in a number of different systems. I drew out the very simple conversion through the oxidation and going to citrulline and nitric oxide. But this potent vasodilator is extremely important in relaxing smooth muscles as well as blood vessels. So we have improvements in a lot of physiological functions with arginine. Especially in terms of a heat stress, for example. So I'm finishing up with one amino acid, glutamine, and I've got a couple of talks to go through. Mingan's standing up. Come on up, Mingan. I'm on time. Don't stand up and yell at me. I'm doing okay. We know each other too well. With glutamine and glutamic acid in this particular case, in the heat stress, a lot of humidity with this. There was significant improvements in gut morphology, and that's the point that I wanted to note right here, the gut morphology as well as amylase. And it's not my area, but I wanted to talk just about this particular project with the meat. This is specifically looking at 2 different temperatures and glutamine and showing that the improvements through this amino acid in terms of the antioxidant capabilities are affecting the meat, particularly maybe glutathione peroxidase and a number of different things that are occurring to improve overall meat quality. So I covered so much when I thought about how to summarize this. I said, let's just figure it out in the workout group. So we'll maybe de-stress there and come up with lots of different things to solve the world's problems. So Mingan, that's all I had.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, questions, hard questions.
So just start at the top. Would that amino acid linked with the gut maintenance 3 be similarly important in growing birds in layers and breeders? Absolutely. Absolutely. There's no difference there. Absolutely. The only difference I can think of in threonine, glycine, serine is with the broiler breeders is the feed intake. Okay, so a layer, a table egg bird, would be on the downside for intestinal potential morphology because she eats at ad libitum, 100 grams a day, versus a broiler breeder, which might be at a skip a day. If you've got a skip a day bird, that is stressful. Okay? That intestine is a tube, just like this. So it goes a whole day and it doesn't eat, and then it eats as fast as it can. It puts everything right back through that tube. That is causing stress in that bird. So I can visualize that those amino acids could have higher needs in that environment. Maybe for Professor Chott. I think this is yours. That's what I'm passing it. Okay, I'll read it. How do you explain the nice effect of high protein diets versus heat increment of protein? I have no idea. The only thing that I could think of was the temperature environments that were created did not break the, I like Ferry's line where he showed the, what you call it? I mean, it was, oh, you had the graph, and then there was a point of no return when the birds, the spike. Maybe, I'm going to quote that, maybe the spike didn't occur in some of those projects that were done with higher levels of protein. So thereby the heat increment was not that big a deal, and since feed intake was low, more amino acids helped. That's
as good as anybody who could give that question, answer that question. I think it's really difficult because that particular trial, if okay, high protein diet, give you a really good effect under heat stress conditions. But if you look at from the theory of energy metabolism, so assimilation of protein is very expensive in terms of energy expenditure. So compared with fat or even starch. So the more protein remaining in the gut for assimilation, the more heat increment that will bring about. So that's the theory. But trials will tell you something. Right at the end, the birds will never lie to us. And it also requires many, many experiments to come to the right condition, the right conclusion. So that's why one trial that a lot of people used to joke about it. If you have a really good trial, don't repeat it because it'll tell you another story.
Yeah, absolutely. Well done. Okay, reducing crude protein under hot conditions, maybe. I think we need to be looking at balance. I think we need to look at balance, and I think the amino acid pattern is probably going to change, which is going to change balance, and I think we need to be per therm, which is ratioing the amino acids based on caloric density of the diet. Potentially fat density versus other energy densities, but I think we've got to look at balance in that situation. Do you know that in the U.S. or nutrition is changing dietary amino acid profiles hot periods? No, I mean, for example, I'm glad that Ferry showed the slide of the growth in Asia, for example, because that really sets a precedence of what we're up against. So when you think of the U.S. and you think of growing chickens, when is it hard to grow chickens in the United States? When's it terribly hard? Right now. Yeah, we've got nights that are 0 degrees and days that are 25 degrees. Our houses are closed, so that's a psychometric nightmare in terms of growing chickens. The wintertime is when it's hard in the U.S. Summertime's easy. You turn the fans on 24/7, you expect to lose 2 points of feed conversion, it's no big deal. I mean, you set up your markets, I mean, the way it is. So nobody's really changing in the U.S. We use Class A ventilation houses to adjust for things, and we feed them very similar. I think you have a potential to do things in hot environments that can help, though, in terms of changing. And I think what you need to do is you need to conduct research in models that mimic what integrators or poultry companies are experiencing. Don't just do a study and say this is going to be stress, this is thermal neutral. Do it whereby you've got a region in the world that has stress, and figure out what that stress is and figure out how many points of weight you're going to reduce, and then do the trials, and you're comparing apples to apples in terms of collecting data that's meaningful if you really want to move your amino acids.
Thank you very much, Professor Kidd. It's done a fantastic job reducing 1 hour talk to 20 minutes.